Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. And thank you for Kim to be our speaker tonight, who I've heard a couple of times speak before about a, a topic, chemical trespass, that gets me crazy. Anyway, Kim Erndt-Pitcher, she's the Director of Ecological Health with Prairie Rivers Network. And her area of focus is biodiversity, ecosystem health, pesticides, and pollinator habitat conservation. Kim's background, she's worked for Prairie Rivers Network for over 14 years. And before coming to Prairie River Network, she was a crew member and environmental educator at Living Lands and Water based in Moline, Illinois. And she also worked as a technician with the USGS in Kansas City, Missouri. She spent most of her career working to promote and advocate for the protection of biodiversity and the integrity of natural systems. Kim has a BA in biology, a master's in biology with a focus on ectotoxicology from the University of Central Missouri. And she is an NSF IGERT fellow, which you'll have to tell me what that is, Kim, but on watershed science and technology from Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. And thank you so much for being here and educating us. I'll
Thank
turn
you.
it to Kim.
It's great to be here, everyone. And IGERT stands for Integrated Graduate um, Environmental Research Technology. It's just a wonky acronym for a wide-ranging interdisciplinary graduate doctoral program. Um, and right now, I am, as Laura said, the Director of Ecological Health at Prairie Rivers Network. I live down in Southern Illinois. We are based in Champaign-Urbana, and we've been around for over 50 years. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and do just a touch of Zoom housekeeping. All right. So, as Laura said, today I'm going to talk a little bit about chemical trespass in Illinois ecosystems. And before I start that, though, I wanted to tell you just a little bit about PRN. Prairie Rivers Network is a nonprofit statewide conservation organization based in Champaign. Our mission is to protect water, heal land, and inspire change. We utilize sound science and the law and community action to create the change that our members and we would like to see in the state. We have a wide range of program areas, including renewable energy, climate, water, pesticides, the removal of coal ash and legacy contaminants, biodiversity protection, river health, invasive species policy, and more. So this talk is kind of a high level, it's not wonky, not super scientific overview of the issue of chemical trespass or pesticide drift, as we like to call it also. And, we say chemical trespass because these are chemicals that are physically trespassing onto private and public lands. They're not staying where they're intended to remain. And about 8 years ago, we started our tree and plant health monitoring program. And this program was specifically designed to monitor and document symptoms of herbicide injury in particular across the state. And we started this program because we were getting calls and emails from people all around the state saying, my leaves and my trees or my vegetable plants or my flower beds, they look strange, they're curled and cupped. Is this herbicide injury? And this was about the time that we started seeing a lot of issues on the landscape with dicamba, which is a widely used herbicide in row crop agriculture. So, not to get too far ahead of myself, we started this monitoring program, and we're about to enter our 8th year of monitoring. So just a little background, what's a pesticide? Pesticide's a blanket term for many different types of mixtures or substances that are intended for preventing, destroying, repelling, or mitigating a pest. This is any substance or mixture of substances intended to use as a plant regulator, meaning controlling different processes within the plant, like growth or photosynthesis, can be as a defoliant to make it lose its leaves or a desiccant to dry it up. So there's lots of different kinds of pesticides. Again, it's that umbrella term for fungicides, which target fungi, rodenticides, target rodents, nematicides for nematodes, insecticides is a sort of broad-reaching term for pesticides that target invertebrates or insects, and then herbicides, which target plants. And when we talk about pesticide drift, we're largely talking about the movement of pesticides from their intended application site to an unintended area. And this is mostly through the air or through the atmosphere. The pesticides can move through the environment in many ways, but drift typically means we're talking about through the air and atmosphere. We use pesticides a lot. They're great tools. We use them in turf management for the use of control of broadleaf weeds and unwanted insects. We use them to control woody vegetation and rights of way, agricultural production, and in the management of our beloved natural areas. Now, one of the large uses or excuse me, one of the main ways that pesticides are used is in chemical turf treatment. And drift injuries do happen from lawn and turf applications. 2,4-D and dicamba are two widely used herbicides that are used in lawn applications as well as agricultural use. Excuse me, I'm very sorry. And they're also widely sold in stores. And, you know, treatments can occur with your neighbors in your neighborhood, on golf courses, or on city property. Oops, sorry. And it's important to note that many of these products that are sold in stores or are used by industry also contain insecticides and fungicides. And all of these pesticides can move through the air and the water. So over the years, particularly in the past decade, chemical trespass or herbicide drift has really made the headlines. And this is largely because we have changed the way our culture sees and uses pesticides, and the way that our agricultural system has also changed. So one of the results of this is the leading use of pesticides is agricultural production. And that's really what's kind of brought this to the forefront. And that's because 75% of our land is in agricultural production. And the majority of that is planted in herbicide tolerant soybeans and corn. And when I say herbicide tolerant, pardon me, that's when we can apply these herbicides over the top of these growing plants. We can kill the weeds, but the crop itself is fine. So they genetically modified to be resistant to herbicides. And this has led to a heavy reliance on this has led to a heavy reliance on herbicides for weed management in agricultural systems, which then has turned into this issue of having herbicide-resistant weeds. These weeds have evolved to be, tolerant of these herbicides, and they're beginning to be tougher and tougher to kill. In combination with that, we just farm differently. We have fewer fence rows, our equipment is bigger, the fields are bigger. So we've really changed how we grow food and grow commodity crops in our state. And this graph here is one of the only graphs in the presentation, but these dotted lines here are showing the development or the evolution of herbicide-resistant weeds on the landscape. And you can see, so in the 1980s, we really start to see the types of weeds that are resistant to these herbicides increase dramatically. And that's because we are starting to use more herbicides And we have more genetically modified traits in these agricultural commodities that are resistant to multiple herbicides. So when we might just have Roundup resistant soybeans or cotton or corn, now we have soybeans, cotton, corn, multiple other crops that are resistant to dicamba, to 2,4-D, to glyphosate, to multiple herbicides, and this is called stacking resistance in traits. And it's, you know, people that work in this field say that, you know, the growers are on this herbicide treadmill. They're having a hard time getting off because they're not using the other tools that historically we used to manage weeds, like cultivation or light tillage and crop diversification. So drift, there's two types of drift. We have particle drift or primary drift. And this happens when the sprayer is still in the field. And it doesn't have to be an agricultural field. This is the boom sprayer. And you can see that spray drift moving across away from its target area. That's particle drift occurs when those particles are blown away during the time of application. This could be from a backpack sprayer. This could be from a pool behind in someone's yard, at a golf course, or as seen here in this agricultural field. Particle drift can also occur from aerial applications. And here we have a crop duster, and you can see these particles in the air. And if it were a windy day, they would be moving off that application site, that field, and into the surrounding area. Now, in recent years, since particularly back in 2017, 2018, when we started to see dicamba-resistant soybeans and cotton on the landscape, we started to deal with the issue of vapor drift. And this little video shows vapor drift. Now, vapor drift can occur when the herbicide's been applied or the pesticide applied at a calm day. The applicator's done nothing wrong. They're following the label law. But that pesticide volatilizes or vaporizes, you know, the next day, 5 days later, 6 days later, and it moves in the atmosphere, sometimes really long distances, where it then falls out and causes injury to non-target plants. So some things to think about here over the next couple slides, because we're going to start talking about symptoms and what, you know, you might want to keep an eye out and look for in the coming weeks and months as summer progresses. Pardon me, allergies are killing me this year. This here is a white oak, and you can see these leaves are curled, they're cupped, they're distorted. These are not the smooth, open, flat, soft, white oak leaves that you would like to see on this tree. And of course, we have on it the monarch butterfly. Well, the white oak is our state tree. It's also a keystone species. Oaks are keystone species in many of our forests. They're tremendous host plants for the caterpillars of hundreds of species of moths and butterflies. They produce valuable food resources for wildlife, and just are incredibly valuable in our ecosystems. But, you know, we have lost a tremendous amount of biodiversity in our state. 99.9% of our original prairie is gone, 90% of our wetlands, and 89% of our forested lands. This is a tremendous decrease in ecological diversity. And my colleague, Robert Hirschfeld at PRN, made this video using his drone. And I think it just exemplifies kind of the state of our biodiversity in Illinois. You know, here is this egret. It's in this drainage ditch, which may or may not have at one time been a little meandering stream, but now it is conveying water away from farm fields. And that egret is there and is surrounded by row crop agriculture. So we've taken an incredibly diverse prairie ecosystem and reduced it down to, just a few species, primarily two species, corn and soybeans. So, drifting herbicides can have multiple impacts throughout ecosystems, and this is some of the things that we're really concerned about. Plants that are exposed particularly to commonly used growth regulator herbicides like 2,4-D and dicamba that are used in lawn care and in agriculture, they produce fewer flowers. Those flowers can be visited less frequently by pollinators. They may also contain lower nutritional content. So that means that caterpillars or insects that consume them might be smaller in size themselves. And, this can lead to potential disruptions in plant pollinator networks. And as we've seen with many of the orchards and other specialty growers, exposure can result in reduced fruit and nut production, whether it's, peaches or apples or acorns. And this in turn can mean fewer resources for wildlife. And when they have fewer resources, it increases stress. And of course, as you see these next several slides, we also have to remember that this is all occurring in addition to habitat loss, stresses of invasive species, diseases, pathogens, our suppression of fire, removal of fire from the landscape, and then these extreme weather events that also cause stress, such as drought and floods. So this map here of Illinois, we've made to kind of illustrate where we've done monitoring. And the dots that I'm going to pop up here in a second are just the counties that we have monitored. We have monitored at PRN 289 sites in 40 counties. We try to visit these sites multiple times throughout, our project. So we try to do once a year. Some sites we do more than once a year. But at all of these sites, since 2019, every visit we have observed and documented symptoms of off-target injury. In 2023, the Illinois Natural History Survey also looked into this issue of pesticide trespass. And they examined 185 high-quality natural areas, public and private, around the state, covering 95 counties. 99% of their locations that they monitored also had symptoms of herbicide drift. Both of our studies, Prairie Rivers Network and the Illinois Natural History Survey's work, did analysis of leaf tissue for pesticide residue, and herbicides and fungicides were the pesticides that were mainly discovered in those tissue analysis. So how do we recognize drift in plants? Well, one of the things that we do, whether it's in your backyard in a week or two when the leaves are coming out, or when you're out on a hike, you want to rule out any direct application. Did you cause it yourself? Perhaps is it on the edge of your neighbor's property where maybe their lawn application is bleeding into your land? You also want to rule out that it could have come from the soil or in the root zone. So if you're looking at an agricultural field, or if you're next to a golf course, you have to think also that some of that uptake could, in the plants near that barrier, could be coming from the soil or the root zone. And we don't really want to monitor those if we're monitoring to document symptoms. We also want to make sure that symptoms are present across multiple families and species. And so when I'm out at someone's property and I'm looking at their trees and plants, I'm going to look at the ground layer. So maybe it's a vegetable garden, maybe it's a flower bed, maybe it's a prairie, and look for symptomatic plants and multiple different types of plants. Then I'm also going to look at the understory. So dogwoods, redbuds, those low story, those understory trees, bushes and shrubs. And then in the canopy, and particularly in the very, very tops of these large trees, because in many instances, when we have volatilization of these herbicides and they're moving across the landscape and the atmosphere, the tops of the trees are going to be where they're going to see that curling and cupping. And while it may not be down at eye level and in your face, it's still very stressful for those trees to have these symptoms. And I'll explain why in a few minutes. So most commonly, we see leaves that are going to be curled and cupped. They're disoriented or twisted sideways, up and down, or they're just drooped. So essentially, they're not facing the sun the way they need to be. They also have irregular margins. They may be wavy. They may be extra pointed. They could be smaller or just generally deformed. And many times, they also show chlorosis or they're starting to yellow. So here's an example of a blackjack oak. And these leaves are cupped. They're curling a little bit on the edges. They're a little stunted. So if you look in the lower right, you'll see this bunch of leaves, and some of them look round and balled up. Those are leaves that are stunted, and those were most likely exposed to like 2,4-D or dicamba, one of those growth regulator herbicides. When those leaves were growing, those herbicides made them deform essentially. And so they didn't grow appropriately. The larger leaves on this tree, when that exposure happened, they were mostly done doing their growth. They have a little bit of curling and twisting, but this tree got hit more than once, most likely because of the different stages of injury on it. Here we have a northern pin oak. These leaves are cupped. They're deformed generally. Their lobing is a little bit exaggerated. And they're also disoriented. So they're twisting on that little petiole, that stem that connects that leaf to the branch. And they're not oriented to the sun the appropriate way. And so as you're looking at these, we have to think these leaves need to be able to face the sun. They need to be flat. They need to be opened so that they can photosynthesize and do what they need to do to feed these trees and plants. And when they have these injuries, they're not able to do that. Here we have hackberry at a private residence. Again, clearly they're twisting, they're curling. There's some yellowing here with chlorosis. Again, classic signs of 2,4-D, dicamba. White oak, good example of drooping and cupping. I think that you might be surprised this summer when you're walking around, if you keep an eye out for these symptoms, just how widespread they might be. Here we have box elder. Box elder is extremely common and extremely sensitive. It continues to grow throughout the growing season, so we'll often see these shoots that look like this. They're yellow, they're chlorotic. This leaf has irregular margins, so it's wavy on the edges of the leaf, and they're cupped almost like a little bowl. Here we have redbud. These could be anywhere. It's been years since I've seen a normal redbud in the state. Just about every redbud that I can remember has injury. Doesn't have to be on every leaf because they continue to put leaves out as the growing season progresses. Sometimes they're curled up, sometimes they're curled down, even on the same tree. But they can have greatly reduced leaves, like very small leaves. Typically, they'll have these irregular margins of this waviness or the scalloping. And, again, this can really impact the health of this tree in the long term. But we kind of say that the redbuds are the canary in the coal mine. So they're a great indicator for herbicide injury because they are so sensitive. But it's not just trees. Here we have some native plants. This compass plant on the left. Clearly, they're twisted and deformed. and curled. And on the right is some garden phlox in someone's yard. And these leaves are cupped and deformed. Um, and, many of these native plants are host plants to important insects that feed our migratory birds and other wildlife. So, if their food sources are being contaminated, that can have ecosystem ramifications throughout the food web. Here we have some green beans. These leaves on the left are kind of puckered and they're cupped. They were also a little chlorotic or yellowing. And then on the right, it's not uncommon to see tomatoes. Tomatoes are very sensitive. These leaves are stunted, twisted, and deformed. So I just wanted to tell you a little story. This is the state champion post oak. It's down in Washington County, and this is one of those trees that we've been looking at for many, many years. And we've actually started visiting it and monitoring it in 2017. But we started taking tissue samples in 2018. And it's on a 10-acre property. It is approximately, it's circled in red right here. And it's about 800 feet to cropland. So not terribly close, but not, terribly far away either. It's a majestic tree owned by the Harper family. And you're going to I'm going to share a little bit about what we've seen over the past several years in our study. We've documented symptoms on this, an average of 18 different plant species in this pasture every year since 2018. And here it is. It's a huge tree. That's many of us that do our monitoring for our program standing underneath it. And these are photos of the leaves in 2017 and 2018. And these leaves are twisted, they're stunted, they're disoriented to the sky. 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022 was a particularly bad year for this tree. 2023, again, these leaves are very small. 2024, they're twisted, they have irregular margins. And then just so you can remember, if you haven't seen a normal post oak leaf, this is a normal one. It's smooth, it's green, it's supple, it's soft. A caterpillar that was just hatched or just emerged from its egg can easily consume this leaf. The leaves that are injured, they're smaller, they're thicker, they're tougher. And I would bet that their nutritional content is not as high as this nice healthy leaf here. So from 2019 to 2024, we took tissue samples of this tree and we tried to do it multiple times a growing season. So this is a tree that we didn't just visit once a year. We visited it multiple times through the year because we wanted to see, what was happening throughout the growing season. Was this tree and other trees in this community, because Washington County is largely surrounded by agriculture, are they experiencing multiple exposures a year? And every yes here is an independent exposure from our calculations. And we concluded that this tree in 6 years experienced 18 different exposure events from the pesticides that we tested it for, largely just the herbicides. In 2024, we did have the money to also look at fungicides, and we did get some detectable levels of fungicide exposure, particularly in the end of the growing season samples that we took. So this tree and all the trees around it are under continual stress throughout the growing season. So this isn't just a one-off. This is happening every year, multiple times through the growing season. And what does that mean for tree health? Well, this is a neighbor of the post oak. You can see the post oak here in the lower left. This tree is experiencing, canopy thinning. This is very typical of these sites that we've been looking at for 6, 7 years, we see thinning canopies in many species. We also start to see this epicormic branching. So this is like the last ditch effort for these trees to produce food. They're putting these leaves out on the branches and on the main stems of these trees. And then we have branch diebacks. So if you see here in the middle right, there's these dead branches, also very common in many of these locations that we've been documenting symptoms year after year. And this is the canopy in 2024 of the state champion post oak. We could not look up and see this sky years ago, and we are starting to see the signs of significant stress on this majestic creature. So, that was a very quick overview of our work. I am not going into a lot of the details in this presentation, but you can find our information in the details and graphs and data on our website. But, what are we doing as an organization to address this? Well, we're using that sound science, law, and community action to create change. And we're working with our partners. And we've built some really strong partnerships over the past several years to work on this issue. We've released some reports. We have Drifting Toward Disaster, which we did with the Xerces Society and the National Wildlife Federation back in 2020 when dicamba started creating all these problems across the landscape. We've also done some reports from the Department of Natural Resources and the Nature Preserves Commission. And then just last year, we released our report, Hidden in Plain Sight, which, I think really highlights the level of decline and stress that we're starting to see in these landscapes, both backyard and natural areas and nature preserves. We've also been trying to raise awareness through the media. Our report, Hidden in Plain Sight, was featured in the Chicago Tribune last summer. We've also been on radio programs and podcasts and tried to do smaller local papers as well, and have also been featured in a few of the more national magazines, because this isn't just an Illinois problem. This is throughout the Midwest and South. Many states are facing the same issue. I work with 7 other states. We have a working group, and Illinois is ahead of them in terms of having documentation and data on the injuries, but everyone is facing this, and we're all working together to try to find solutions. We're also giving educational tours. Some of you may have been to one of our tours. We've given several over the past 6 years. We tried to get legislators out in the field. We tried to get municipality, park managers, arborists, mayors, community members out to sites where we have documented injury, talk about it, let them see it. Once you really and truly look at it, you cannot forget what it looks like. We always say, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And you realize wherever you go that this is a really common problem, this chemical trespass and herbicide injury. So these tours are really valuable in that regard. We've also started the Save Our Trees Coalition. It is a coalition of members that have been dealing with this issue on their private property or on their favorite park or on their playground and schoolyard, and they want to make a difference and get involved. And if you're interested, you can email me or reach out to Prairie Rivers and we can connect you with the coalition. We meet twice a month. We also share stories. It's hard to get people to care about trees, but it is really critical that people understand how prevalent this problem is and how widespread it is. And I want to play this short little video for you that we made to kind of share the stories of the people. Some of them are in the coalition that deal with this year after year.
I look out my top window and I used to see green canopy and luxurious growth in nature. Now I see dead branches.
In general, the trees are getting less healthy every year. We're losing more and more.
It's sad. It's sad to walk through the woods.
It's not just me who's breathing this. It's all the children who come out here to school. It's my own children.
I love vegetables and I love to eat. I just wanted to grow my own food.
I still send a complaint every year that, yep, I'm still seeing this issue and I'm still out here.
It makes me feel like I can't live here. I'm the 5th generation here and I love living here, but it makes me feel like I'm a negligent parent for exposing my children to the fields around us.
You can't feel good about seeing something that you spent your whole life protect dying in front of your eyes and not being able to do anything about it.
Makes me feel violated.
It's terrible. I don't want to live like this.
I just don't know what the solution's going to be. I would hope that somebody will finally say, yeah, if it's chemical damage and we're going to end it, it's going to stop.
So we have several videos available on our YouTube channel that I'm happy to share if you want to share them along. Some of them have, people's faces telling these stories, and then others of them are just like this, where they're more educational and narrative. So what are some of the other possibilities in addressing this issue? I mentioned a few that we're doing. We also put forward a couple pieces of legislation this year. One of them was, banning the use of volatile formulations of the herbicide 2,4-D, which is widely used in soybeans, cotton, and many agricultural commodity crops. It's also widely used in lawn care. And there are formulations of 2,4-D that are not known to volatilize and move off site. They're more likely to stay put. And, that's not going to solve the problem. It's one chemical, one type of that chemical. But, 2,4-D is the #1 herbicide that we find in our tissue analysis. And it is really traveling long distances, and it is really impacting our oaks. And we put forward that piece of legislation because we thought that if we could reduce the amount of injury that was occurring to these oaks, and some of them are 2 miles from the nearest potential golf course or agricultural field, they're testing positive for 2,4-D. If we can help make that stop, then we might get ourselves a little bit of time to find other solutions. Of course, you can restrict the use or ban other formulations of volatile herbicides as well, not just 2,4-D. That is something that we put out there in 2024. It did not make it. It's dead, but we're going to bring it back next year with a little bit more outreach and education. We also put forward a bill this past year requiring large-scale pesticide applicators that apply near schools, parks, and playgrounds and daycares to provide notification to school and park administrators prior to their application. And that one also did not make it, but we're going to bring that back again next year. It's just providing these park and school administrators the information that they need so they can bring children indoors. These children here that you see in this photograph are playing at Barnhart Prairie Nature Preserve, and it's also the grounds of Bluestem School. It's an outdoor education school, pre-K all the way to K1. And these kids are outdoors all the time. For the past several years, several times a growing season, the teachers and children have had to be rushed inside to avoid being sprayed by pesticide drift from the surrounding fields. So we're just trying to put some regulations out there, some policies out there that require advance notification when you're going to be applying near these schools and playgrounds to better protect our children. Another option is to require setbacks from these locations. So, there's a application setback right now for restricted use pesticides can apply a restricted use pesticide within 500 feet of a school. But the majority of pesticides that we use in agriculture are not restricted use. So there isn't a setback. So that's another option. We haven't put that forward, but it is certainly a possibility. Some other things that could possibly be impactful, they're not going to be the silver bullet and solve this problem, but requiring consistent signage and notification for turf applications for those homes and people that live on golf courses or in neighborhoods, making sure that, you know, children are kept safe, pets and people are kept safe, and that they have the notification. They can cover their vegetable gardens if they want to, and do what they can to try to reduce the injuries that come from the use of these herbicides. Another one, put buffers, so an application buffer all around areas where there are nature preserves or qualifying sites, so high quality natural areas. And a buffer is basically a setback. So you have to be, you cannot apply pesticides, simply put, within, you know, 400, 500 feet of this nature preserve. So there's a buffer that hopefully would protect that spot from receiving injury. Of course, and then there's lots of other options that we could use to help reduce the cases of drift across the state. But I think one of the really important ones that as a state we need to tackle is we have a complaint process where if you receive injury or you notice injury, you can file a complaint with the Department of Agriculture. Well, this complaint process is very outdated. It's ineffective. The United States Environmental Protection Agency estimates that only 4% of the pesticide injuries on the landscape are actually reported. And so this gives, you know, states have to give this information on complaints to US EPA, and US EPA uses that information to make federal legislation. The whole process in Illinois and many states around the country is just rife with problems. There's social pressure and intimidation against, you know, reporting your neighbor or neighboring farmer for application, you know, misuse. And oftentimes there's no resolution. People get tired of putting themselves out there and spending the time to file these complaints, but there not being any resolution. The fines and penalties are often too low. There's just a lot of hurdles. There could be a whole talk on this issue by itself, because I think it is a really important issue, but also very complicated. And then finally, just real quickly, we need to adequately fund monitoring programs. We don't know what we're losing. We can't work to protect it. We also need to adequately fund our regulatory agencies. You know, back in 2018, when we started to see all these injuries from dicamba on the landscape, the Illinois Department of Agriculture, who's tasked with enforcing our Pesticide Act, was backlogged in this complaint process for months and months and months. And, you know, if we were putting out there to the department the number of complaints that we're seeing on the landscape and just our monitoring, they would be extremely backlogged. And then many of our partners, and many of you know, like, we need to diversify our agricultural system again. This would really help this problem, get away from this 2-crop system and this, you know, herbicide treadmill, and diversify and make us more food secure and more resilient. And oops, that is all I have. So I would be happy to take questions if you all have any.
Thank you very much, Kim. And I know I've seen this one a couple of times, and it still kind of depresses me. Becky, you have a question?
I have actually 2 questions. How do you assess tree canopies? You mentioned that you look at tree canopies for damage. Do you use drones for that?
No, so most of the time when we're out in the field, well, always, we take binoculars with us, And also, you know, if we have a good camera, we can use that. I mean, for our monitoring, we always, you know, mark the number of species, like the number of white oaks that have symptoms. And then we take, you know, 3 to 4 representative photographs of the 50 to 100 white oaks that have symptoms. And then the same for all of the species. But so we try to take a good photograph, and many times that's in the canopy. So we need to have a good lens. And if we don't have a good camera for that, then we'll just, you know, make a note that its injury is in the canopy throughout the area. Oftentimes, though, it's not very hard to see. Like, you can tell that these leaves are thinner at the tops. Then the canopy won't be as dense when there's injury in the treetops.
Becky, did you say you had another question?
Yes, and I think we maybe know the answer to this, but how will the current administration's budget cutbacks impact IEPA's ability to operate in the state?
You mean the federal administration's cutbacks? You know, I can't say for sure. We know that there's being cuts everywhere. One of the things I think that I am the most concerned about is just the lack of access to agency data that historically we have had and information, and the reluctance for agency personnel to freely communicate with constituents. So, you know, when it comes to pesticide drift, EPA largely, you know, turns to IDOA to do this because, oh, well, that there's IEPA, in my opinion, should be more involved, but they usually turn to IDOA. And you know, it's not gonna get any better right now. But I feel like the more people that speak up, and I feel like we are in a state where if any of the states in the US have a chance of making a difference here in this current administration, I feel like Illinois might actually be one of those states. We have more information. We have, you know, a Democratic governor. We have built a lot of momentum on this issue in the past several years. And we know that the pressure that's being built is making these agencies be concerned and talk about it internally. But right now I'm just mainly concerned about the radio silence that's out there.
Victoria, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, excuse me. Yes, thank you. One of the things I do during the years, I work for a landscaper. And over the last 3 years when I've been working there, I brought to their attention that the plants that they are getting in from the nurseries out in Moni and Kankakee are affected by the chemical drift.
Wow.
And so, oh yeah, you see it. It's real easy. When you mentioned the red buds, we're not even selling red buds for landscaping because they say, oh, there's something wrong with them. And I'm trying to explain to the owner that it's herbicide drift.
Yeah.
The nursery is aware of it being herbicide drift. He's out in the middle of a bunch of corn and soybean fields. I mean, he knows what's happening to his plants. Reason I'm bringing this up is people that can afford to have trees planted for landscaping are the kind of people we need to reach, because these people don't want to spend their $1,000 to get this tree planted and then have it shrivel up on them. And they're the people that are seeing it in your local towns. I mean, where your communities are, your wealthier communities. They are the people that have the money to influence what is seen in the market. I mean, we're not all the great little kids running around in the field when they aren't out at Disney World. Okay, their Disney World is closer to home. They can't get on a plane and go somewhere. But the families that have the money are the ones we have to reach, because they're the ones that are affecting news media and policy. So I'm saying reach the people that are having landscaping done.
Well, I think that's the value of a lot of the news reports that have coming out. The one that was in the Tribune was excellent. It was right on front page. Thank you, Victoria. Sarah, you had a question?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions actually. At the beginning, you were talking about soybeans being tolerant of the herbicide, but aren't they, when they get sprayed like that, aren't they still absorbing the herbicide within the soybean itself?
Yes, yes. You know, a lot of these herbicides are what we call systemic, so they go through the entire plant. And, you know, that's how they target those growing parts. And so, you know, they still are on the plant itself, just not showing symptoms. It's not impacting its growth.
But the person, and soybeans, I think, go into mostly like cattle feed and stuff. Maybe, but the person ingesting the soybean is getting the herbicide, are they not?
Well, so there is, you know, there's allowable limits for food products.
Okay.
So a lot of that needs to be tested for levels, but not all. And this isn't my area of expertise. And some of this, and you know, we're just kind of learning as we get thrown into the pit here.
Sure.
But
Sure.
you know, there's not all foods like tomatoes, for example. They don't have an allowable limit of atrazine, which is it's a herbicide used in corn. There's not an allowable limit for how much atrazine can be in a tomato you consume because it's not a herbicide that you use on tomatoes for their growth. So they're not going to test that, you know, and set a standard for that in tomatoes. So it's extremely complicated. And you know, typically when someone's vegetable garden gets drifted on, you know, we have to say, you know, if they're asked by like a weed specialist or you know, someone from an agency that comes out to talk to them, many times they're told, you shouldn't eat the crop because we don't know what drifted on it and we don't know the rate. So most people toss them out.
And then my other question is, I've heard about farming equipment now where when they go through the fields, there's some kind of camera where it recognizes the weed and it just sprays that one particular weed. Has that reduced the amount of drift going on? I mean, when I heard about it, I thought, well, that sounds better than doing a whole field.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly would save the farmers a tremendous amount of money. I don't know how many farmers are actually using that technology right now. I do know that it is out there or it's in the works, but it's not, from what we've seen, readily being used or available. So, but
that's a shame.
Those kinds of technologies would certainly help reduce the amount of pesticides in the environment.
Okay. Thank you.
So, oh, Barbara, you have one question? You have a question?
Yeah. Back in the 90s when I got my pesticide applicator's license, you know, we always were told not to spray when it was windy. Now, what you're talking about here is volatilizing, that the chemicals volatilize days after they're applied. This is something like I've never heard of this before, and this is very what can I say? This is the most concerning thing I've ever heard of, because now all of a sudden, 6 days after you put something down, it's gonna volatilize. So does anybody, is this widely known? Is this something that's told to anybody when they're buying a chemical? Is it on the bottle?
Yeah, so not all, pesticides will volatilize. 2,4-D, the ester formulation, dicamba, atrazine also, they're all known to volatilize for days after they've been applied. Unfortunately, they're also widely used across the Midwest and South. So, there is training on it. Part of the reason that dicamba created this huge problem throughout the Midwest and South back in 2018 when dicamba resistant soybean and cotton came on the landscape is growers were applying dicamba to tens of millions of acres of resistant soybeans and cotton, but not all growers had resistant soybeans. Some of them were still using soybeans that weren't resistant. So the dicamba volatilized into the atmosphere from all of these acres and moved and caused widespread injury to millions of acres of soybeans that weren't resistant. And so that became it was just a huge alarm for the agricultural community. And we realized that, there's this thing called atmospheric loading. When you apply these volatile herbicides to large areas of land within a small window of time, and then you get warm weather or warmer weather, then they can volatilize within the same time frame and move off. And that's where you see these landscape level injuries to trees, plants, and crops, because there's so much of it moving in the atmosphere. And that's really just been happening since, at this scale anyways, since we started using these crops that are resistant to these herbicides.
And when was that? Back approximately what decade?
So for dicamba, it was around 2017, 2018 is when we got the soybeans and cotton. And then, now we have 2,4-D resistant crops, so you can apply 2,4-D over the top to growing crops. There are formulations that you need to use over the top now that kind of try to reduce that long range movement. But these other formulations, we think a lot of this large scale injury, across the state, particularly to our oaks, is happening from the early season applications. We're having really warm springs. It was almost 80 degrees here in Makanda, and it's not even, May 1 today. And so this is really warm weather, and they've already been applying 2,4-D. So that 2,4-D that's early in the season, it's not even over the top of growing crops, is going to be volatilizing and moving long distances. So we've got this issue of, we've got warmer weather. Stuff is starting to volatilize earlier in the season. It's really complicated. I'm trying not to get too wonky, but also explain it simply. So I apologize if I just confused everyone.
No, I don't think you did. So we're coming to the end of our hour, and I'm going to take the opportunity to let everyone know that I've been following these pesticide issues and disappointed, Kim, to hear that the one on the notification to the schools when they were going to be spraying didn't get through, but we're going to be following it. And if anyone's interested, you can get on League of Women Voters Issues and Advocacy and get onto the Google group for the climate. It's linked under climate, environment, and land stewardship, and get information when it comes out about it. Also, this whole issue with chemicals. In Europe, chemicals have to be tested first before they can be used to see if they're dangerous or not. That's not a law. That's not in the United States. The chemical companies can bring out everything like this dicamba or everything else, and then you have to indicate that it's causing injury. So we have kind of a backward system in that.
Yeah, and once they're approved, it's very hard to get any changes made.
You bet. Money's already been put into it.
Yep.
So thank you, everybody, for coming on for Earth Day. Thank you, Kim. You're outstanding. I look happy to hear you again and look forward to hearing you again in the future. And thank you for taking the evening to be with us. And this will be recorded and we'll send them out and then share it with your friends. Let's get the information out there. And thanks everyone for being here.